They didn't come at night. They came at breakfast. My hands still smelled of nettle bread when the knock came. Sharp, measured, and too polite. I knew it before I opened the door. Not who, but what. You can tell when the air outside your home doesn't belong to you anymore. 3 men, boots too clean for the mud. One held a folded paper with my name on it. The other 2 stared like they'd already decided. The dogs didn't bark. They always bark. That morning, they just watched. I asked if I could put on my shawl. They said no. They didn't drag me. That would have been too honest. No, they escorted me down the road like I was some visiting aunt they didn't trust with the children. And all along the way, I felt it, that hum in the throat of the village, that invisible pressure behind closed shutters. I knew who was watching, and worse, who wasn't. I was 37, widowed, childless, and too quiet for comfort. They brought me to the church hall. It smelled like mildew and old wood, but I'd always liked it before. It was cool in the summer and held the morning sun like it meant something. That day it felt smaller. The pews were wrong somehow. Closer, tilted. The light came in sideways. Reverend Haskett sat at the far end, back straight, lips tight. He didn't look at me when I entered. They made me sit. I tried to speak, just to ask what they wanted, but the man to my right raised his hand like I was a noisy child. My voice withered in my chest. Then they asked the questions. Not directly. Not at first. They asked if I remembered what I said to Widow Lau last Thursday, by the well. They asked if I'd ever sold herbs without the apothecary's mark. They asked why the baby 3 houses down wouldn't stop crying after I passed its window. And I made the mistake of laughing. Just a little. Just enough to try and dissolve the moment. It didn't dissolve. It thickened. The man to my left muttered something to Haskett. The Reverend's jaw clicked. Then they brought in the first witness. Alice Dow. I taught her to make soap when her mother took ill. I shared my yeast when her bread wouldn't rise. She once said I had the hands of an angel. Now she said they found feathers in her doorstep after I left. That her child woke up speaking backward. That I had been seen walking with no shadow in the garden on a cloudy day. I said nothing, because anything would have sounded like a riddle. The second witness was worse. Thomas, the mill boy, said he'd seen me by the river with a book I never owned. Said I smiled at him, and he felt his knees go heavy. Said my breath smelled like iron. The Reverend asked if I denied it. I opened my mouth. Closed it. There's a sound that comes before hysteria, like wax stretching before it tears. The hall was full of that sound. My name hung in the air like smoke from a wet fire. I told them the truth. That I kept herbs because I had no husband to buy me help. That I walked alone because I had no children to chase. That I listened, quietly, because loud women end up abandoned. But none of those words landed. They looked at me like I was already gone. I don't remember standing, or being led away. I remember the cold of the cell, the stone bench, the dry bread, the silence, and the way the shadows on the wall moved even when I didn't. The nights were worse. Something about the way sound carried through the stones. I could hear someone crying 2 cells over. Or maybe it was in my own chest. Hard to say. Time stopped moving in lines. A week passed, I think. Then they brought me to the river. They didn't say why, but I knew. They called it a test. They tied my wrists and ankles. Not tight, but firm, as if they wanted the illusion of care. The crowd was smaller than I expected. Just a few faces I recognized. The baker's wife. The boy with the crooked teeth who used to chase me for honey when he was small. Haskett, of course. Arms crossed. Eyes tired. No one met my gaze. They said something about God revealing the truth. About water being pure and holy. That it would accept the innocent and reject the wicked. Then they lowered me in. The shock hit first, cold like knives, cutting into places you didn't know could sting. Then came the silence. Not the silence of air, but that underwater kind, where the whole world folds in on itself and your own heartbeat becomes a drum in your ears. I didn't struggle. I just sank. And I thought, this is it. This is what it means to be nothing but suspicion wearing a woman's skin. But someone pulled me out. Not because they believed me, but because I hadn't floated. They wrapped me in cloth, muttering. Someone touched my cheek. I think they meant it kindly, but their hand was shaking too hard. I spent the next 2 days half-conscious, mouth full of river and lungs sore from coughing. Then came the markings. They brought me into a room I'd never seen before, round, close, too warm. A single candle in the center. A man with ink-stained fingers. A bucket. They called it examination. They wanted to see if I had the mark. A place the devil had touched me, where I couldn't feel pain. where blood didn't rise. They turned me over like meat. Poked, scratched, watched. I said nothing. They found a scar behind my knee. One I got as a girl when I fell on the woodpile. They called it a possible sign. I laughed again. This time it came out like a cough and a sob at once. The man marked something on a page. I was led back in silence. That night, I prayed. Not to be saved, but to disappear. Not die, just vanish. To have never been here. To unbe. When I woke, I wasn't alone. A girl sat across from me, younger than me by decades. Her hair was matted. She held her hands like they belonged to someone else. She didn't speak, but her eyes told me everything. She'd been accused too, and no one had believed her either. We didn't speak for hours. Not because there was nothing to say, because whatever could be said no longer had weight in this place. Words didn't mean anything here. Not truth. Not pleas. Not prayers. Only silence seemed honest. But silence can become a friend when everything else becomes dangerous. They took her before dawn. She looked at me once, just once, as they pulled her from the cell. Her eyes weren't wide with fear. They were tired. Not the kind of tired you sleep off. The kind that sits in your marrow and tells you this isn't the first life you've been hunted in. I never saw her again. 2 days later, they brought me parchment. They told me to confess. That a confession would ease the soul and save the town. That I would not be harmed if I just admitted something. I asked what they wanted to hear. They didn't answer. So I wrote what I knew they'd believe. That I whispered at the river. That I touched herbs without permission. That I had dreams I didn't understand. That a black cat visited my doorstep when it rained. I signed it with a shaking hand. They thanked me and said I'd be reviewed. Reviewed. Like I was a ledger entry or a moldy apple. The cell felt different after that. Not safer. Just closer. Like the walls had moved in a little tighter. That night, I heard footsteps outside. Slow. Deliberate. The scrape of something against stone. I stood, pressed my back to the far corner, and waited. The door didn't open, but a voice came through the cracks. You won't leave whole. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't cruel. It sounded tired, as though the speaker had said that same sentence 100 times before and never once been wrong. The voice disappeared. The sound did not. I started to dream things. Strange things. Of walking into the village barefoot, and no one looking at me. Of speaking, but no sound coming out. Of standing in the center of the square, arms lifted, and crows landing on my shoulders as if I were part of the trees. I'd wake with the taste of dirt in my mouth. The last time they summoned me, I thought I was being led to sentencing. Instead, they brought me into a small room. A table, a chair, and a boy, 15, maybe 16. He wouldn't look at me. His hands trembled on the table. The man beside him placed a paper in front of me. This is the boy you cursed, he said. I looked at the boy again. He flinched. I didn't know his name. Didn't know his family. I had never seen him before. But he was crying. And crying was dangerous. I said nothing. The man leaned forward. He says you made him sick. That you stared at him in the market. That he heard your voice in his dreams. I wanted to scream. I wanted to say you are the ones putting voices in heads. You are the ones who dream of pain. But instead, I nodded. Softly. Let them write down my remorse. That afternoon, they took me to the chapel. But not to pray. To wait. 1 hour. Then 2. Then Haskett arrived. Alone. He sat beside me. Didn't speak for a long time. Then he said, "You could have lived differently." I turned my head. And I looked at him. Really looked at him. His collar was stiff, white as bones. His shoes polished. But his hands were cracked and bleeding at the knuckles. Not from cold. From scrubbing. Scrubbing something that wouldn't come off. I said nothing. He stood. Left. And I never saw him again. They released me the next morning. Just like that. No warning. No escort. They opened the gate, handed me a cloak, and said I was free to go. Go where? I walked. Through the edge of the village, head down, hoping the wind would carry me away if I moved softly enough. No one spoke to me. No one spat. No one even looked. That was worse. I passed the well. Past the schoolhouse. Past the trees that once bloomed yellow in spring. Everything looked smaller. And older. And foreign. My home had been emptied. The door swung loose. Inside, the shelves were bare. My mortar cracked in 2. My dried herbs scattered like brittle leaves across the floor. The bed was gone. The air smelled of dust and something else. Absence. I didn't cry. I swept the floor. I lit what candles I had left. And I sat in the center of the room. I don't know how long I stayed there. Days blurred. People never came. Not even to accuse me again. They had wrung every word from my name, and now it meant nothing. Eventually, a child appeared. She came to the door at dusk, hair tangled, cheeks wind-chapped. She held something in her hand. A thimble, rusty, bent. She said, "It won't hold the thread anymore." I looked at it, then at her, and I nodded. She left it on the step, walked away. The next evening, a boy came. Silent, a cut on his finger. I gave him honey and clean cloth. The next day, a woman. She didn't speak, just left a basket of firewood. No one said they believed me, but slowly, they came back, one by one, for cuts, for fevers, for the kinds of things prayers couldn't reach. No one asked what happened in the cell. No one asked if the dreams were real. Sometimes, I still hear the voice at night. "You won't leave whole." I didn't, but the truth is, none of us do. Not when silence is louder than fire. Not when your breath becomes a crime. Not when your name becomes a question no one wants to answer. They wanted a witch. They made one. Not with potions. Not with curses. But with fear. And a locked door. And the kind of loneliness that scrapes your bones hollow and replaces them with ash. I don't curse them. Not with herbs. Not with words. I curse them only by surviving.